My name is Commander Zeth'kar, and in my 47 cycles of training the galaxy's most elite warriors, I have witnessed every conceivable form of stupidity. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day a human walked into my academy. Let me paint you the scene. Nexus Prime, the most prestigious combat training facility in known space, floating majestically in the void between three star systems. Here we forge legends from the strongest, fastest, and most lethal beings the galaxy has to offer. Mordin warriors with their impenetrable exoskeletons, Kraftnog berserkers who can tear through titanium with their bare claws, energy beings from the quartermaster systems who can literally phase through matter. And then there was Amy Kowalski. She stood maybe 5.5 feet tall, if you were being generous with your measurements. Pink skin that looked like it had never seen real combat, soft brown hair that probably smelled like those flower things humans are obsessed with, and eyes that sparkled with what I can only describe as dangerous optimism. She looked about as threatening as a newborn grub. "Excuse me," she said, approaching my registration desk with a smile that was far too bright for a military installation. "I'd like to enroll in your combat program." I stared at her for a full 10 seconds. Then I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, mind you, but a full belly laugh that echoed through the entire registration hall. Other cadets stopped their conversations to see what was so amusing. "Little human," I said, wiping moisture from my compound eyes, "this isn't summer camp. We train warriors here. Beings who can crush mountains with their thoughts, survive in the vacuum of space, and turn enemies into molecular dust." Amy tilted her head slightly, that infuriating smile never wavering. "I understand completely, sir. When do I start?" The audacity. Here was this fragile little creature, probably weighing less than my left appendage, acting like she belonged among the deadliest fighters in the galaxy. Humans had only recently joined the Galactic Federation, and their military contributions were, shall we say, laughable. They couldn't fly without machines, couldn't survive extreme temperatures, and their reflexes were slower than a sedated sloth beast. But regulations are regulations. If a species wants to send representatives to the academy, we have to accept them. Even if those representatives look like they'd lose a fight to a strong breeze. "Fine," I growled, sliding the enrollment datapad across my desk. "Sign here, and initial there. Fair warning though, human. The mortality rate in our program is 37%. And that's for species with natural armor and regeneration abilities." Amy picked up the stylus with those tiny, soft fingers and signed her name with surprising confidence. "Thank you, Commander Zeth'kar. I promise you won't regret this decision." Oh, how wrong she would turn out to be. The next few weeks were exactly what I expected. Amy struggled with every single physical challenge we threw at her. Strength training? She could barely lift weights that Kraftnog younglings used for warm-ups. Speed trials? Mordin elders moved faster than she did. Weapons proficiency? She held a plasma rifle like it was going to bite her. But here's what really irritated me. She never quit. Day after day, she'd show up with that same ridiculous smile, ready to fail spectacularly at whatever new test we had prepared. The other instructors started taking bets on how long she'd last before washing out or ending up in the medical bay permanently. "Give her 2 more days," Admiral Vashi would say, watching Amy attempt basic combat maneuvers that looked more like interpretive dance. One day, Judge Quintara would counter, observing as Amy tried to spar with a training dummy and somehow managed to knock herself down instead. But Amy Kowalski kept showing up, week after week, month after month, accumulating failures like trophies while maintaining that insufferable optimism that made me want to throw her out an airlock. And then came graduation day, the final combat test, a tradition as old as the academy itself, where surviving cadets face off in a no-holds-barred battle simulation. Only the strongest, smartest, and most ruthless graduate to become certified galactic warriors. As I announced the rules to this cycle's remaining candidates, I caught sight of Amy in the lineup. She'd somehow survived the entire program without quitting, despite being objectively terrible at everything we taught her. "Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary entities," I announced to the assembled cadets, welcome to your final examination. You will enter the combat arena, and the last being standing will earn their certification. All weapons and abilities are permitted. Medical teams are standing by. Amy raised her hand. Of course she did. Yes, Cadet Kowalski? Just to clarify, sir, when you say last being standing, does that include psychological victories? I blinked all four of my eyes. What kind of question is that? Just wondering about the parameters, she said with that same bright smile. Little did I know I was about to learn exactly what she meant. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Amy's fellow cadets, because understanding them is crucial to appreciating just how spectacularly wrong I was about everything. First, there was Morden. Not just any Morden, mind you, but Morden Prime 7 Alpha, heir to the warrior caste of his species. Picture a walking tank crossed with a beetle. If that beetle stood 8 feet tall and could bench press a starship. His exoskeleton was polished black with gold trim that indicated his family's military honors. When Morden walked, the floor vibrated. When he spoke, other cadets listened. When he sparred, medics went on high alert. Then we had General Kraftnog. Yes, an actual general, taking our course as part of some interspecies military exchange program. The Kraftnog were essentially what would happen if you took a crocodile, gave it opposable thumbs, taught it tactical warfare, and then fed it nothing but rage and protein supplements for 1,000 years. This particular specimen had scales that could deflect plasma shots and claws that left gouges in reinforced steel walls. His service record included 17 successful planetary conquests. And finally, Quartermaster A. The energy beings from the Quartermaster Collective didn't bother with individual names, just designations. Quartermaster was essentially a sentient lightning storm contained in a vaguely humanoid force field. It could phase through solid matter, manipulate electromagnetic fields, and discharge enough energy to power a small city. Fighting Quartermaster was like trying to punch electricity itself. These three represented the absolute pinnacle of galactic military evolution. And then there was Amy Kowalski, who on her first day of strength training managed to get stuck under a barbell that most species use for rehabilitation therapy. Need some help there, little human? Morden asked, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. But there was no malice in it. If anything, he sounded genuinely concerned, the way you might worry about a lost pet. I've got it. Amy grunted from underneath the weight, her face turning an alarming shade of red. Just working on my form. I watched from my observation platform as Morden gently lifted the barbell with one appendage and set it aside. Amy popped up, still smiling despite the obvious embarrassment. Thanks. I'll get it next time. Morden's compound eyes blinked in what I recognized as confusion. Perhaps you should start with a lighter weight? Where's the challenge in that? Amy laughed, and I swear I saw Morden's mandibles twitch in what might have been amusement. This became the pattern. Day after day, Amy would attempt exercises that were clearly beyond her physical capabilities, fail spectacularly, and then thank whoever helped her with such genuine warmth that even the most hardened warriors started treating her like a beloved mascot. During speed trials, she consistently finished dead last. Not just last, but so far behind that the automated timing system assumed she'd given up and stopped recording. General Kraftnog, who normally viewed everything through the lens of tactical superiority, started offering her advice. Your stride is inefficient, he'd hiss in his reptilian accent. You're wasting energy with unnecessary movements. You're probably right, Amy would reply, not even breathing hard despite her pathetic performance. How do you maintain such perfect form at those speeds? And then Kraftnog would spend 20 minutes explaining Kraftnog running techniques, growing more animated as Amy asked increasingly detailed questions. I watched this exchange with growing bewilderment. Since when did General Kraftnog give free coaching sessions to inferior species? The weapons training was perhaps the most painful to observe. Amy held every piece of equipment like it was made of unstable antimatter. Plasma rifles, gravitic hammers, quantum blade arrays, she approached them all with the same cautious respect and managed to be equally terrible with every single one. The targeting system is quite intuitive, Quartermaster would explain, its electromagnetic voice crackling with what I swear sounded like patience. Simply align the reticle with your intended target and apply pressure to the activation mechanism. Right, align and squeeze. Amy would nod seriously, then somehow manage to fire a plasma bolt into the ceiling. Oops. Safety first though, right? The other instructors and I started a betting pool. How long would the human last? Admiral Vashi put his money on her washing out after the first combat simulation. Judge Quintara was more optimistic, giving her until midterm evaluations. I went with my gut instinct that she'd quit after someone inevitably hurt her feelings by pointing out her obvious inadequacies. She's like a therapy animal, Admiral Vashi observed one day as we watched Amy somehow trip over her own feet during basic tactical movement drills. Look at how relaxed the other cadets are around her. He wasn't wrong. Despite being the weakest, slowest, and most incompetent trainee in Academy history, Amy had somehow become the social center of her cohort. Morden would save her seats in the mess hall. Kraftnog would walk her to classes to make sure she didn't get lost. Quartermaster would spend hours explaining basic concepts that any competent warrior should have grasped instinctively. It's fascinating from an anthropological standpoint, Judge Quintara mused. Her complete lack of threat display seems to activate protective instincts across multiple species. I snorted. More likely they're keeping her around for entertainment value. Nothing builds confidence like watching someone fail at everything you excel at. But even as I said it, something nagged at me. Amy never seemed frustrated by her failures. Never got discouraged when others outperformed her by orders of magnitude. Never showed even a hint of the self-doubt or competitive anxiety that drove most cadets to push themselves harder. She just kept showing up, kept trying, kept smiling, and kept asking questions that somehow made even the most arrogant warriors want to help her succeed. I should have recognized the warning signs. I should have realized that anyone who could maintain such persistent optimism in the face of constant failure was either completely delusional or operating on a level I didn't understand. Unfortunately for my ego, Amy Kowalski was definitely not delusional. The combat arena on Nexus Prime is a masterpiece of military engineering, and I say this without a trace of modesty since I helped design the blasted thing. Picture a space roughly the size of 3 football fields. If football fields could shift terrain every 30 seconds and randomly spawn environmental hazards designed to kill you. The arena floor was divided into 7 distinct biomes, a desert section with heat mirages that could fry your optical sensors, a frozen tundra where the temperature dropped low enough to shatter most metals, a dense jungle with predatory plants that had developed a taste for cadet blood. An urban warfare zone complete with collapsing buildings and sniper positions, a zero-gravity chamber that messed with your inner equilibrium, a toxic swamp that would dissolve anything organic, and my personal favorite, a lava field with geysers of molten rock that erupted on irregular intervals. 23 cadets entered that arena, veterans from a dozen different species, each representing the pinnacle of their respective evolutionary advantages. Warriors who had trained their entire lives for this moment, beings who could level city blocks with their bare appendages, creatures who had never known defeat. And Amy Kowalski, who looked like she was about to ask if anyone had packed snacks for the journey. Remember, I announced over the arena's communication system. This is a survival exercise. Use any means necessary to eliminate your opponents. Environmental hazards are fair game. Medical teams will extract you if they can reach your location in time. The last cadet standing receives full military certification and immediate officer ranking in the Galactic Defense Force. The starting klaxon sounded, and chaos erupted. Morden immediately charged toward the center of the arena, his massive form bulldozing through 3 smaller opponents who made the tactical error of getting in his way. General Kraftnog took the high ground in the urban zone, using his natural climbing abilities to establish a sniper position among the collapsed buildings. Quartermaster simply phased through the floor and began moving as pure energy through the arena's power conduits, appearing randomly to electrocute unsuspecting targets. And Amy? Amy sprinted toward the jungle biome and vanished into the undergrowth like a scared rodent. Typical. Admiral Vashi muttered from beside me in the observation booth. The human chooses to hide rather than fight. How disappointingly predictable. I adjusted the camera angles to track the action. Within the first 10 minutes, we were down to 15 cadets. The Zephyrian twins had eliminated each other in a spectacular display of fraternal competition. A Gorlon warrior had gotten too close to one of the lava geysers and was currently being scraped off the arena floor by cleanup drones. 3 more had fallen victim to Quartermaster A's electrical ambushes. "Where's the human?" Judge Quintara asked, scanning the various monitor feeds. I cycled through the jungle cameras until I found her. Amy was crouched behind a particularly thick tree, approximately as far from the action as it was possible to get, while still technically being in the arena. "There," I pointed, cowering like the coward I always knew she was. But something was bothering me. Amy wasn't just hiding randomly. She'd positioned herself at a vantage point where she could observe the entire arena through gaps in the foliage. Her head moved constantly, tracking the movements of the other combatants with the intensity of someone conducting a detailed tactical analysis. 20 minutes in, we were down to 8 cadets. Morden had claimed the center territory and was defending it like a fortress, his armored bulk deflecting plasma bolts and energy blasts with contemptuous ease. General Kraftnog had turned the urban zone into his personal hunting ground, using guerrilla tactics to pick off opponents who strayed too close to the buildings. Quartermaster continued its hit-and-run electrical attacks, appearing and disappearing like a lethal ghost. And Amy was still hiding in the jungle, apparently content to let everyone else do the actual fighting. "This is pathetic," I growled, zooming the camera in on her position. "She's going to sit there until someone finds her and puts her out of her misery." "Actually," Judge Quintara said thoughtfully, "from a pure survival standpoint, her strategy isn't entirely without merit. Why engage superior opponents when you can let them eliminate each other? Because this is a combat academy, not a philosophy class." I snapped. "We're supposed to be training warriors, not professional cowards." 30 minutes elapsed. 5 cadets remaining. The arena had become a 3-way standoff between Morden, Kraftnog, and Quartermaster A, with 2 other fighters trying to stay out of the crossfire. Each represented a different tactical approach. Morden relied on overwhelming force and defensive positioning. Kraftnog used mobility and precision strikes. Quartermaster exploited its unique energy-based abilities to control battlefield tempo. It was a masterclass in military strategy, the kind of engagement that would be studied in tactical academies for generations to come. And Amy was still hiding behind her tree like a lost tourist. "I can't watch this anymore," I declared, reaching for the emergency extraction controls. "I'm pulling her out before she embarrasses herself further." "Wait," Admiral Vashi said suddenly. "Look at Monitor 7. I switched feeds and felt my mandibles drop in shock. Amy was moving. Not toward the exit, as I'd expected, but deeper into the arena. She was circling around the main combat zone, using the environmental obstacles to mask her movement, staying in the blind spots of the arena's sensor network. "What is she doing?" Judge Quintara whispered. The answer became clear 60 seconds later when the 3 remaining fighters converged in the center arena. They were tired, damaged, running low on ammunition and energy reserves. Morden's armor showed scorch marks from energy weapons. Kraftnog's left arm hung useless at his side from a plasma burn. Quartermaster A's energy matrix flickered with instability from overuse. They faced off in a triangle formation, each waiting for one of the others to make the first move and create an opening for the third to exploit. And that's when Amy Kowalski walked out of the jungle, approached the 3 deadliest beings in the galaxy, and said the most terrifying words I'd ever heard in 47 cycles of military training. "Hi guys, mind if we talk?" The silence that followed Amy's casual greeting stretched for exactly 4.7 seconds. I know this because I was staring at the chronometer display, my brain refusing to process what I was witnessing. Here were 3 beings who could individually conquer small solar systems frozen in place by the most mundane sentence in Galactic Standard. Morden was the first to recover. "Human Amy," he rumbled, his massive form shifting slightly. "This is a combat exercise. You should not be here." "Oh, I know," Amy replied cheerfully, settling herself cross-legged on the arena floor like she was at a social gathering. "But I was watching you three fight, and I got to thinking. You've all been going at this for almost an hour now. Aren't you tired?" General Kraftnog's remaining functional eye narrowed suspiciously. "Fatigue is irrelevant. Only victory matters." Sure, Amy nodded agreeably. "But what happens after victory? Like Kraftnog, you've conquered 17 planets, right? What did you do on day 2 of planet number 18? I felt my compound eyes widening. What kind of question was that? What did it matter what happened after conquest? The point was the conquest itself. But Kraftnog's scarred features showed a flicker of confusion. "I established military governance, implemented standard occupation protocols." "That sounds really administrative," Amy said with genuine interest. "I bet you're good at paperwork too. Did you ever think about what the conquered populations were doing while you were filling out forms?" They were being governed," Kraftnog replied, but his voice carried a strange uncertainty. "By someone else, though," Amy pointed out gently, "while you moved on to Planet 19. So really, you spent maybe a few weeks on the fun conquest part, then left other people to do all the relationship building and community management. That must feel kind of incomplete, right?" From my observation booth, I watched Kraftnog's expression change. For the first time in the exercise, he wasn't calculating attack vectors or defensive positions. He was thinking about Amy's words, and that thinking was making him uncomfortable. "This is psychological manipulation," Quartermaster had declared, its energy matrix pulsing with agitation. "The human is attempting to distract us from the combat objective." "Well, yeah," Amy admitted with a laugh. "But I'm also genuinely curious. You're an energy being, right?" "That's so fascinating. What's it like, existing as pure electromagnetic force? Do you dream? Can you feel loneliness?" "I do not experience such primitive emotional states," Quartermaster replied stiffly. "Really? Then why do you use plural pronouns when you talk about your collective? If individual experience doesn't matter, why not just refer to yourself as we all the time?" I watched in horrified fascination as Quartermaster A's energy form flickered. The linguistic conventions are for the convenience of other species. But you chose the designation A, didn't you? The first letter. That's not random. That suggests some kind of individual identity, some way you distinguish yourself from Quartermaster B or C. So maybe you do experience individuality, even if your culture doesn't encourage you to acknowledge it? The energy being's form wavered more noticeably. In 30 years of observing Quartermaster entities, I had never seen one display visible uncertainty about its own nature. Amy turned to Morden. "And you? Morden Prime 7 Alpha. That's quite a lineage designation. 7 generations of military excellence, right?" 8, Morden corrected automatically. "I am the 8th in the Prime Warrior line." "Wow, that's a lot of pressure," Amy said sympathetically. "Do you ever wonder what you'd choose to do if you weren't carrying on the family tradition? Like, what if you'd been born into a family of artists, or engineers, or teachers?" Morden's massive form shifted uncomfortably. "Such speculation is irrelevant. I am what I was bred to be." "But you chose to come here," Amy pointed out, "to the academy. You could have just accepted your inherited rank in the Morden military. Instead, you decided to prove yourself among other species. That suggests you wanted to earn recognition based on your own merit, not just your bloodline." I realized my breathing had stopped. Amy wasn't just making casual conversation. Every word, every question, every observation was precisely targeted at fundamental insecurities these warriors had probably never consciously acknowledged. "You're all so accomplished," Amy continued, her voice warm with what sounded like genuine admiration. "Kraftnog, you're a brilliant military strategist. Quartermaster A, you have abilities that transcend physical limitations. Morden, you've got strength and skill that most beings could never achieve. But when was the last time any of you felt truly satisfied with what you'd accomplished? Satisfaction is weakness, Kraftnog growled, but the conviction in his voice was wavering. Is it, though? Amy asked. Or is constant dissatisfaction just another kind of prison? I mean, if you can never feel good about what you've achieved, then what's the point of achieving anything? Quartermaster A's energy matrix was now fluctuating wildly. Purpose comes from function within the collective. Individual satisfaction is irrelevant. But you're not with your collective right now, Amy observed. You're here, alone, competing against individuals from other species. Doesn't that suggest you wanted something your collective couldn't provide? From my observation position, I could see all three combatants beginning to show signs of psychological distress. Morden's usually perfect posture was slumping. Kraftnog's tactical awareness was deteriorating as his attention became focused inward. Quartermaster A's energy form was becoming increasingly unstable. What are you doing to them? Admiral Vashi whispered beside me. I couldn't answer, because I was finally beginning to understand what I was witnessing. Amy wasn't using weapons or physical force. She was using something far more devastating. She was forcing these warriors to confront the emotional and psychological contradictions they'd spent their entire lives avoiding. Humans, I realized with growing horror, were natural psychologists. Their evolutionary development in complex social groups had given them an instinctive understanding of emotional manipulation that transcended species barriers. Amy could read the insecurities and unspoken doubts of beings whose psychological frameworks were completely alien to her own. You know what I think? Amy said, standing up and brushing dust off her training uniform. I think you're all incredibly brave. Not because you're willing to fight each other, but because you're willing to question yourselves. Most beings go their entire lives without ever examining what really drives them. Morden's voice was barely a whisper. What if I am not worthy of my lineage? What if conquest is ultimately meaningless? Kraftnog added, his reptilian features showing genuine anguish. What if individual consciousness is the only reality that matters? Quartermaster A's energy form was now barely maintaining cohesion. Amy smiled at them with what appeared to be genuine affection. Those are really good questions. And you know what? I don't think you need to answer them right now. In fact, I don't think you need to fight each other at all. I stared at the monitors in complete shock. In the span of 10 minutes, this small human had systematically dismantled 3 of the most psychologically resilient warriors in the galaxy using nothing but conversation and empathy. The last being standing wins, right? Amy asked, looking directly up at the observation booth's cameras. Well, I'm still standing. And I'm pretty sure these 3 have more important things to think about than beating each other up. That's when I realized the terrifying truth about humans. They weren't physically superior to other species. They were something far more dangerous. They were weaponized social workers. What happened next defied every principle of military training I had ever learned. Morden, who could have crushed Amy with one appendage, slowly lowered himself until he was sitting on the arena floor. I forfeit, he said quietly. I need to think about who I am when I'm not fighting. General Kraftnog's remaining functional eye was focused somewhere beyond the arena walls. I also withdraw from this exercise, he declared. Perhaps it is time I learned what peace feels like. Quartermaster A's energy form stabilized slightly. I require time to process individual consciousness parameters. Combat is no longer relevant to my current objectives. 3 formal forfeitures. In 47 cycles of conducting final examinations, I had never seen a single voluntary withdrawal, let alone 3 simultaneous surrenders by the most qualified candidates. Amy Kowalski stood alone in the center of the arena, officially the last being standing, having never thrown a punch, fired a weapon, or engaged in any activity that could remotely be classified as combat. Well, she said, looking up at our observation booth with that insufferable smile, I guess that settles the psychological victory question. I felt my entire worldview crumbling. This small, weak, defenseless human had just defeated 3 elite warriors using nothing but conversation. She had weaponized empathy, turned emotional intelligence into a tactical advantage, and somehow made surrender seem like the logical choice. How? I managed to croak over the communication system. Amy's expression shifted, and for the first time since her enrollment, I saw something other than cheerful optimism in her eyes. There was intelligence there. Sharp, calculating intelligence that had been hiding behind all that apparent incompetence. "You want to know the truth, Commander Zeth'kar?" she asked. "I've been studying all of you since day one. Every species, every individual psychology, every cultural pressure point. While you were laughing at my physical failures, I was learning how your minds work. The revelation hit me like a plasma torpedo to the thorax. You were never trying to pass the physical tests." "Oh, I was trying," Amy clarified. "But not because I thought I could beat anyone in a strength contest. I was establishing my harmlessness, building trust, getting close enough to understand what really drives each of you. Humans are social creatures, Commander. We've spent millions of years learning how to read each other, how to build alliances, how to resolve conflicts without violence. Those skills translate surprisingly well across species barriers." Admiral Vashi was staring at the monitors with something approaching terror. "She planned this entire scenario." "From the beginning," Amy confirmed. "The question about psychological victories wasn't random curiosity. I was clarifying the win conditions because I knew exactly how I intended to achieve them." Judge Quintara's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you?" Amy's smile returned, but now it carried an edge that made my exoskeleton crawl. "I'm a human, Judge Quintara, and humans don't conquer through force. We conquer through friendship, understanding, and making other species want to join us voluntarily." She gestured toward the 3 former combatants, who were now sitting together in what appeared to be an impromptu group therapy session. "By the way," Amy added conversationally, "would you mind if I started a counseling program here at the Academy? I think a lot of your cadets could benefit from talking through some of their deeper motivations and psychological frameworks. Morden, Kraftnog, and Quartermaster have already expressed interest." I stared at the scene below. The 3 most dangerous beings in this training cycle were now engaged in what could only be described as emotional support networking, facilitated by the species we had all dismissed as weakest in the galaxy. "Congratulations, Cadet Kowalski," I said finally, my voice hollow with defeat. "You have earned your certification." "Thank you, Commander," Amy replied. "Oh, and don't worry about feeling foolish. Underestimating humans is a very common mistake. We've built our entire civilization on being consistently underestimated by bigger, stronger, more obviously dangerous species." As I watched Amy help her former opponents work through their existential crises, I made a mental note to recommend significant revisions to our threat assessment protocols. Clearly, we had been evaluating species based on entirely the wrong criteria. Physical strength, technological advancement, and military capability were apparently far less important than the ability to make your enemies want to stop being your enemies. Humans, I realized with dawning horror, might be the most terrifying species in the galaxy. Not because they could destroy you, but because they could convince you to destroy yourself. Or worse, convince you to become their friend. Either way, I was definitely updating my resume to include xenopsychology specialist. Something told me that skill set was about to become very much in demand.